Hi friends, in this video we're going to talk about how to create a Python web application in Flask that acts as a OAuth 2.0 authorization code flow client. That means your web application will use OAuth 2.0 server for the users to log in, and in fact all the user information will be actually stored in the OAuth server, and the web application will just use the OAuth server to log in the user and get the user information. That means the user information need not be stored in the web application. So if you don't know what OAuth 2.0 authorization code flow is, I've already made a video and blog post on that, and I will leave the link of that blog post and video in the description. So please be sure to check out that content if you don't know what OAuth 2.0 authorization code flow is. But anyways, let's try to recap it. When the user clicks login in the web application, the user will be redirected to the OAuth server, and the OAuth server will log in the user and send an authorization code to the web application, and the web application will use this authorization code, client ID and client secret to get the ID token and access token, which can be used to get the information about the user's login. And since the user is logging in the OAuth server, the web application need not store the database of the users. All the users login page and the users database can be implemented by the OAuth server. So it offloads the security concerns and the job of maintaining the users in the web application. And I think it's really good in Python applications because securing Python applications is not so easy. All right, let's try to implement this scenario. So for that, we need a web application. It will be a Python Flask web application, which we will write in this video, and we will need an OAuth server. So you can use something like Google, Microsoft, or GitHub. But in this example, we are going to use a Keycloak local OAuth server. That means the OAuth server is locally run in my computer. And Keycloak is a very awesome choice if you want to implement the OAuth server on your own. I've already made some videos on how to set up Keycloak in Windows, and I will leave the link of those videos in the description, so be sure to check out if you don't know how to set up Keycloak in Windows. So currently I'm already running the Keycloak server. So let's try to open the OAuth server, which is the Keycloak server, and let's try to create a user so that that user can be logged in using the web application. So my Keycloak server or the OAuth server is running on the default port 8080. So let's visit it, and let's try to open the admin console. And now we have to log in with the admin user. And now I have created another realm other than the master realm because I don't want to mess the master realm. So for my applications, I have created a realm called my org. So you can easily create a new realm by clicking on this create realm. So I already created a realm called my org, and let's try to create a user in this realm. So currently I don't have a user, so I'll just create a new user, and let's try to write a username, test user, and the email, and let's try to create the user, and let's try to set the credentials of this user. So I'm going to set a password. I'm going to write test@123. So this is my user's password. So now I've created a user and the password very easily in Keycloak. So now I got my set of users and I can log in with this user in Keycloak. You can even see if the user can log in or not. I'm just going to open an incognito tab and write localhost port 8080 /realms/my.org because that's my realm, and write /account. So localhost 8080 realms my.org account, and if I go there, I can sign in, and let's try to sign in with the user we have just created. And now I can see my user credentials are okay and I'm able to log in with this user. Alright, we've created a user. Let's try to register a web application in this Keycloak OAuth server. So I'm going to go to the client section. So let's try to create a client here, and the client ID would be test web app, and let's give some name to it, and let's say next. And in the capability config screen, make sure that you enable client authentication because it's a backend application, and then you enable the standard flow only because it's basically the authorization code flow, and click next. Let's try to host our Python application at localhost 3000. So I'm going to write my home URL as http localhost 3000, and a valid redirect URI is the URI where the user will be redirected after successful login. So I'm going to create a route called callback in my Python application. So I'm going to write localhost port 3000 /callback. And a valid post logout redirect URI is basically the logout redirection URI. That means after the user logs out of the Keycloak server in the Keycloak web application, he can be redirected to our application so that the user doesn't have to manually come to our web application again. the user will be redirected from Keycloak to our application automatically after logging out from the Keycloak server. So in our Python application, let's try to create a logged out callback also, and let's try to make the route called logged out. So after the user gets logged out of the Keycloak application, Keycloak will try to redirect the user to this post logout redirect URI. And let's try to click save, and that's it. We just created a client in a Keycloak, which is a web client which follows OAuth 2.0 authorization code flow for signing in the users. Alright, we have set up our OAuth 2.0 server and registered the user and the client application. Let's try to develop the client application itself, which is the web application. For this, I'm going to take a blank folder and open it in VS Code. Let's try to create a new file. I'll just name it server.py. So we're going to create a Flask application, right? So let's try to create a simple Flask application instance. From Flask, import the Flask class. Let's try to create a Flask application instance, and let's try to make the Flask application run at port 3000. Let's try to create a simple hello world at the home URL so that we can know our Flask application is working. Alright, our Flask application is set up. Let's try to run this now, and our Flask application is running. Let's try to go to localhost 3000, and here you can see the hello world. Alright, since we are going to create a web application, let's try to create a small web page where the user can log in. So I'm going to create a new folder called templates, and here I'm going to create a new file called home.html, and let's try to create a small hello world in this, and let's try to render this template, right? So for that, you're going to import the render template from Flask and return that template here. So I'm going to write return render template of home.html. So let's try to run this Flask application again, and let's try to reload this. And now you can see authorization code flow example, and this is a h1 which you have rendered in the home.html. Alright, this looks great. Let's try to create a login button where the user will click the login and go to the OAuth server, and that's where we are going to introduce the authlib. The web app has to do some steps in the OAuth 2.0 authorization code flow. You can implement this manually, but it can be prone to errors and it will be a lot of work. So for that, there is an amazing Python library called authlib which does most of this workflow for you. So let's try to use authlib Python module. So to install authlib, go to the command prompt and write pip install authlib, and authlib will be installed for you. So from the authlib module, we need to import the OAuth class, which will be used to create a OAuth 2.0 authorization code flow client in your Flask application. So before creating the client, let's try to segregate all our configuration into a Python dictionary. I'll just name it as appconf, and let's try to write some configuration here, which is the OAuth client ID, client secret, OAuth 2 issuer, and Flask secret. So Flask secret is basically a random string here. I've just written a long random generated string. You can write any random string here. You have to set the secret key of the Flask application because it uses encryption for maintaining the sessions after user login. And now we need these three items of our web application. So let's go to the Keycloak and get these three items. In our Keycloak admin UI, let's go to our client here, which is a test web app, and go to the credentials and save the credentials. And here, this is your credentials, client secret. Let's try to copy this, or click this copy button and write it in the OAuth client secret. In the settings tab, you can see the client ID, which is a test web app, and this will be the OAuth client ID. So we have the client ID and client secret, and this is the OAuth 2 issuer, which is the realm address. Since our realm is my.org, our realm address or the home page of our realm would be localhost 8080 realms my.org. So that's why we used it here. So since we've got our configuration, let's try to create the OAuth 2.0 authorization code flow client in our Flask application. So here you say the OAuth instance from the OAuth class, and you use the existing Python Flask application here, and you register a client credentials flow application, and you give the client ID, client secret, and you say the scope is OpenID, profile, and email. So these are the client scopes which you're asking from the OAuth 2.0 server. If you don't know the terminology like client, scope, tokens, etc., I've already created a video on that, and I will leave the link of that video, which is OAuth 2.0 introduction. So you can check out that video if you don't know the terms like what are the client scopes, etc. And here I've given the server metadata URL while registration, and this is useful to get the well-known page of the server. So in our case, the well-known page would be the realm homepage / well-known / OpenID configuration. So let's try to visit that page now. This is like a directory to the realm. You have all the endpoints where the client can go and get its required data. For example, if you want to get the token, you go to the token endpoint, And if you want to authorize the users, you can go to the authorization endpoint. All the information, just like an address directory, will be available in the well-known page. And this is the well-known page URL for our realm. So that's why we have in the server metadata URL while registration to the authlib. Alright, we have set up an authorization code flow client in our Flask application. Now we just have to use it. In our home.html, let's try to make the user to login. So I'm going to give a link called /login, and the user should go to the /login page to login. But we did not implement the /login, so let's try to implement that. Let's try to copy this home route, name it login, and let's try to name it as login. And now you have to redirect the user to the Keycloak's login screen. And with this single line, you can redirect the user to the Keycloak's login screen. And here it's telling URL for is not recognized, so import URL for from Flask. So I'm telling redirect the user to the Keycloak, and after successful login, send the user to the callback route, which we did not create. So let's try to create the callback route also. So let's try to name the route callback. Let's try to name the function also callback, and let's try to implement it later. Let's try to leave it like that. And here the route called callback should be matching with our settings in the Keycloak server or the OAuth server. In the settings screen, you have told that the callback URL would be localhost:3000/callback, and that's why the spelling should be matching here. Otherwise, Keycloak will say, I don't know this URL, it was not registered, and it will not redirect the user. So make sure your callback URL will be properly registered in the Keycloak settings. Alright, we have completed till step 5 using just a single line. The user will log in into the Keycloak, and the Keycloak server will validate the user and then send the authorization code to the callback URL. And now in the callback URL, the web application should use the client ID and client secret of the web application along with authorization code to get ID token and access token in exchange from the OAuth server. And that can also be done using a single line, which is OAuth.myapp, because myapp is the name of the client which we have registered in this Flask application. So OAuth.myapp.authorize access token. So what happens in this function is the web application will receive the authorization code and then send the request for token using the client ID and client secret, and then obtain the ID token and access token in return. All the tokens would be present in this token object, and that's it. Just by using these two lines of code, we have completed the authorization code workflow. So authlib is really useful and it makes easy to integrate OAuth 2.0 authorization code flow into your web applications in Python Flask. Alright, you got the token. Now you have to log in the user, right? So how do you implement user login? There are many ways to do it, but we are going to use a very primitive way and very powerful way, which is using sessions. So let's try to use a session. So I'm going to import session from Flask. And when the token of the user is obtained by the Flask application, let's try to set the session. So I'm going to say session of user equal to token. That means in the session, you're going to make a key called user and assign a token to this. So in a way, we have logged in the user, because there is a session attribute called user which is being set, and this can be checked whether the user is logged in or not. For example, in this login route, I have to check whether the user is logged in or not. If the user is already logged in, I should not go to the Keycloak server, right? So you can do that easily by just writing if user in session. And if user in session, then I'm going to write about 404. And I'm going to import abort from Flask. So 404 error code means page is not available, because it's a wrong URL to go when the user is already logged in. So by using the session, I have logged in the user. So after I log in the user, I can send him to the home page, right? So I'm going to write return redirect, and let's try to send the user to the home page. So I'm going to write URL for the home page. So the home URL can be obtained by using the URL for, and here redirect is not recognized because we did not import. So let's try to import the redirect from Flask, and that's it. After obtaining the token, you are logging in the user and redirecting him to the home page. And while rendering the home page, let's try to see whether the user is logged in or not and create content based upon the user login. So let's inject some variables into the home page. So I'm going to create a variable called session, and in that variable I'm going to inject the user. So I'm going to write session.get, and the key for the user data is user, and to display the user token in a prettified way in the home, I'm going to create a new variable called pretty, and it's going to be JSON dumps session user with indent equal to 4. So basically we are going to pretty print a JSON in our home page. I'm getting JSON is not resolved because I did not import JSON. So let's try to import the JSON module. All right, we imported the JSON module. So I'm sending the token data which is present in the session user attribute, and then I'm also sending the prettified version of the user JSON. So in the home page I can display the user information now, right? So since we are using Jinja templating in Flask, I can check if session variable is present or not. So the session variable is basically the user token. So if I have a session variable set, the user is logged in, right? So I'm going to say welcome. Otherwise, if there is no session, I'm going to give the login blink. So let's try to close the if condition using this end if. So if, else, and if. And if the user is logged in, let's try to pretty print the user token. So I'm going to do that using the pre tag, and I'm going to render this pretty variable which I've injected in the Flask route, and that's it. Let's try to save this, and let's try to save the server and run the server. And now let's try to go to the home page. So I'm going to write localhost 3000, and since I'm not logged in, I'm getting the login button, so it's checking whether the session variable is present or not. So let's try to log in, and here I'm in the Keycloak login page, and a lot of information is being sent in the URL. Let's try to copy this URL to Notepad, and you can see the information like response type, client ID, redirection URL, which is a callback, login callback URL, and then the scope and the state and nonce are being sent in the URL. So let's try to log in with the user which we have created, which is a test user. And now Keycloak will send the user to the callback function or the callback route. And in the callback route, we are getting the token. Once you get the token, you are setting the sessions user attribute as token, and you are redirecting to home. And in the home, you are checking whether the session user is there or not. And in the home.html template, if the session is present or the session token is present, you are showing a prettier version of it here. So this is what the information you got from the Keycloak server. And here in the user info, you have preferred username. So you can get the username from there. So let's try to write welcome username. So here I can write welcome, and I'm going to write session.userinfo.preferred username. So session.userinfo.preferred username. Let's try to save the server, and let's try to reload again. So you got the welcome username. Alright, we have logged in the user. Let's try to log out the user. So you have to see the logout button when the user is logged in, right? So in our home.html, when the user is logged in, that means if there is a session object set, let's try to show the link to the logout. And let's try to implement this logout endpoint. So here in the logout endpoint, first let's try to extract the ID token which is present here in the token as an attribute called ID token. So I'm going to write ID token equal to session of user ID token attribute. And now let's try to clear the session. That means log out the user locally in this web application. So I'm going to write session.clear. And now just logging out the user in this web application is not sufficient. You have to log out the user in Keycloak also. So I'm going to write return redirect. And now you have to mention the URL for the Keycloak logout. So this is how you can derive the logout endpoint of the Keycloak server. So it's basically the Keycloak base URL /protocol OpenID connect /logout. And in fact, in the well-known page, you can see the end session endpoint, which is localhost 8080 realms my protocol OpenID connect logout. So that's what we have written it here, the logout endpoint. And here the URL encode and code plus can be derived from urllib.parse. So let's try to import them. From urllib.parse, import code plus and URL encode. So while sending the user to the logout endpoint, you had to give two additional parameters in the query parameters of the URL, which is the post logout redirect URI and the ID token hint. So in the ID token hint, you're going to give the ID token, and the post logout redirect URI is basically the callback function after which the user will be redirected to after logout. And that has been set already in our Keycloak. Here in our client settings, there is valid post logout redirect URLs, and we have set it as /logged-out. So let's try to implement an endpoint here, and for now let's try to write return logged out. So that's it. This is what you do while the user clicks the logout button. First clear the local session and then redirect the user to the Keycloak's logout endpoint, and Keycloak will redirect the user to our local logged out endpoint after logging out the user there. So that's it. We have implemented the logout also. So let's try to save our server and run it again. So let's try to reload the page, and here you got the logout button. We are already logged in. So let's try to click logout. All right, I got could not build URL endpoint for logged out because it's a spelling mistake here. Here our endpoint should be logged out with a capital O. Then it will match with this here. So let's try to again go to the page and click logout. You are logged out. So the user session was cleared locally and from the Keycloak also, and then the user is logged out. Let's try to visualize this. Since it's already automatically redirected from Keycloak, you're not able to see that. So let's try to remove this URL encode thing here and just send the user to the logout endpoint, and let's try to run the server. So let's try to log in the user first. So since the user is logged out, I have to log in again with the test user. So I'm logging in. I got all the information of the user in the token, and let's try to log out now. And since I did not mention the redirect URI after logout, I am manually logging out from Keycloak, and I'm seeing this screen whether I want to log out or not. So I'm saying logout, and now it's saying you are logged out. I'm not being redirected because I did not mention the post logout redirect URI in my logout call. So let's try to do that again. Let's try to add the URL encoded parameters of the post logout redirect URI, and let's try to save this. And here you can see if I don't mention the post logout redirect URI, I'm still in localhost 8080. So I need to manually write localhost 3000 to go to my application. So let's try to go to localhost 3000. Since we are logged out, let's try to log in again. And let's try to log in using the test user. Click sign in, and we got all the token information about the user. And let's try to log out, and seamlessly you're logged out. But if the user is logged in, it should not be right to show this page, right? So I'm going to write a check here that if the user is in session, that means if the user is logged in, I'm going to say about 404. And if the user is not there in the session, that means the user is already logged out. You can show this you are logged out, or else you can even directly display the home page. So I'm going to write redirect the URL to the home page. So that means after the user is logged out, he will come to this logged out page and then be redirected to the home page. So let's try to save this server and run it, and let's try to log in again and log in using the test user. And then if I log out, I'm being called to the logged out endpoint, and since I'm logged out, I'm being redirected to the home page because I have said redirect to the home page. And in the home page, since I don't have the user session set, it's showing the login link. So that's it guys. With very less lines of code, we are able to implement OAuth 2.0 authorization code flow client application. And now let's talk about PKCE or PKCE, which is proof code for key exchange. So it's an additional layer over the authorization code flow where while sending the authorization code request, the web application will send additional string which is called a code challenge. So the code challenge is generated by creating a hash of a random string while sending the code request, and the code verifier will be sent while requesting the access token in this step. So basically, while sending the authorization code to the web application, if some malicious party has hijacked and sniffed the request, he can get to know the authorization code. But since the code verifier did not leave the application, he can't send the code verifier to the authorization endpoint. And this way you can differentiate malicious parties by using PKCE. PKCE can be easily integrated in OAuth 2.0 using authlib just by adding this code challenge method S256, which is SHA-256, and this enables PKCE in the workflow. So that's it guys. This is how you can create a Python Flask web application that can integrate to an OAuth server for logging in the users. I've written a blog post explaining the OAuth 2.0 authorization code flow and the Python code for implementing it. You can copy paste this Python code and implement it yourself. I've also given the snapshot of the Keycloak settings so that you can set up this Keycloak environment in your computer. So please be sure to check out the link of this blog post in the description of this video. Please ask questions or post your valuable feedback in the comment section. Hope you like this video guys. Thank you for watching. Peace.